Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Clapham Junction in southwest London to Limehouse in East London. This ride takes about 50 minutes, and you can do more or less the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. As you can see from this screen, it takes roughly the same amount of time to take public transport between these two locations, and also you have to change trains a couple of times to do it, so cycling is a good option for this trip. The route is relatively direct, although the back streets on the way to Clapham Junction are a little bit wiggly. We also crossed the River Thames 3 times, although as you can see from the map, because of the curve of the river, it's still a straight route. If you enjoy this video, or you just find it useful, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, as I post new ones like it every week. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting on the north side of Clapham Junction Station on Grant Road, and the first thing you want to do is head down this path called Bramlands Close. This is actually part of the old London Cycle Network 37 route, and you can see there's a blue sign on the left there indicating that this is a cycle route. This first bit of the route is, as you can see from the state of this cycle track I'm on, a little bit old and knackered. It's very narrow here, and we go across Falcon Road on this toucan crossing. This part outside the shop is particularly narrow, and ideally it would be rebuilt to a modern standard, but for now it more or less does the job. We go on to Este Road, and the layout of this estate means that there isn't really any through traffic on these streets, so as a result it's nice and quiet, although the road surface could do with a little bit of TLC. As you approach the sports fields at the end of the street, keep a lookout on the left and then turn up this path. It's quite well hidden, but you can see there's a blue sign. Now, normally this is actually open and quite a nice cut through, but unfortunately someone's put some shipping containers there. I think that's probably to do with a construction project, but it puts us out onto Wayford Street, and this street also has no through traffic on it as well. At the end of Wayford Street, you want to turn right here, and just a warning that if you're coming in the opposite direction, it's actually quite easy to miss that turning. Most of this first section of the route has London Cycle Network 37 signs pointing you in the right direction. They're fairly well hidden, but you can just about follow them. Unfortunately, in that direction, that turning is one that you could miss. We come here onto Latchmere Passage, which is quite nice. It has a sort of separate bit for cycles and 2 pavements on the side for pedestrians. Unfortunately, the surface is a bit cobbled, which isn't really appropriate for a cycle path. I really don't like this crossing either. It's really cramped, and if there are any pedestrians at all on it, it's really not a nice spot. But it is a toucan crossing, and you are supposed to cycle on it. But really that whole bit could be reworked to be a lot more comfortable, as it shouldn't really be mixing cycles and pedestrians in that way. But it does do the job. It drops us onto Burns Road, which is actually quite a nice street. I quite like these little terraces. I think they're quite pretty. The next road we're going to turn onto is called Reform Street, and the names of Burns Road and Reform Street are actually linked. That's because this whole area was proposed and laid out by the architect William Burn in around 1824, and apparently this street in particular, they weren't sure what to name it. And as a joke at the time, some town councillors suggested that it should be called Bond Street, as a reference to bonds, as in borrowing money, because they borrowed a lot of money to build the project. But in the end, they went for Reform Street. This is Sheepcote Lane. Personally, this is probably the worst bit of the route. It's a little bit too busy to be cycling on, but then we go on to Culvert Road. We turn left and then go right again. But if we'd gone right on Culvert Road down the bridge, you'd actually very quickly go to an industrial estate, a little light industry bit, which is actually quite central for an industrial estate, you might think. One thing that happens at that industrial estate is they actually have dark kitchens for Deliveroo. So basically that means that sometimes if you order something off Deliveroo from a restaurant you don't recognise, it might actually not be a real restaurant, it might just be a shipping container in a car park, and that's one of the places that it gets done. At the end of this street we go on to this path, and on the right of us, on the top of that embankment slash viaduct, is actually the South West Main Line, so that's all the trains that go into Waterloo. Watch out here, because you can see just on the ground these tree roots. The whole of this path is very, very poorly surfaced, and if you go too fast, particularly if it's wet, here's another one, you might end up on your face, because those routes are deadly, so don't go too quick down it. And if anyone from the council is watching, I would say please resurface that path very, very quickly, because it's not in an appropriate state for people to be safely riding down it. The time to turn off the path is when you get opposite that very low bridge and you turn on to Ravenet Street, I believe that's how it's pronounced. And we come onto this estate, and this is this is an estate. Although you can see cars everywhere, they're all parked. There's not actually any through traffic here. And it's a little bit of a maze to know exactly where to go. So first you want to go down at Alfreda Street, but then very quickly turn off and you'll find yourself on Rawson Street. And at the end of Rawson Street, if you can make out where you're going for all the parked cars, there is actually a cycle crossing at the end here. And do push the button, because I don't know whether it triggers if you haven't pushed the button. And that puts us across onto Macduff Road. And very, very briefly, we're actually on Cycle Superhighway 8 here, which is an original TfL route. The whole of the route's not fantastic. There are good bits to it, and we'll be joining it again later, but we're going to bypass it, and we're going to go into Battersea Park. Now, Battersea Park actually closes at night, but as I have been told by a number of viewers that it's actually open pretty late, even in the winter. So unless you're doing this route very, very late, then you should be okay going through it. If you can get in, it's a really nice ride. Really, really great. No through traffic at all. Barely any traffic even. Yeah, just a nice sort of quiet ride through very, very wide paths. You can't cycle on the smaller paths in the park, only the big carriage drives. Although there are a couple of exceptions, such as being able to access the park like the route we came in. And yeah, it's really, really quite good. Hopefully, Wandsworth Council is building a protected cycle tracks down Queenstown Road, which that runs to the eastern side of this park, and if those go ahead soon enough, you'll be able to go that way instead of cutting through the park, and that'll be much better because it won't be time limited, and it'll also just be a much more convenient route. But there are currently some sort of semi-temporary cycle tracks on Queenstown Road. There's a pavement track on one side, which is not very good, but it's okay if you're in at a push, and then on the other side there's a temporary cycle lane done with wands. So if the park is closed and you do need to go down Queenstown Road, it's not the end of the world. And there's also a protected roundabout to access it. So yeah, you can detour around here reasonably well. It's just probably a lot nicer to go through the park if you can. A bit of history of Battersea Park. Before Battersea Park was turned into a park, it was known as Battersea Fields, and it was where both asparagus and lavender were grown for market. And the Duke of Wellington also came here to do a pistol duel, which I find very interesting. Now, we are coming out of the park, and you want to turn left down Chelsea Bridge. So I actually did this route in this direction deliberately, just to show you how Chelsea Bridge works in this direction, because in the other direction it's very easy. You can see there's a sort of lightly segregated cycle lane on the right hand side there. Those plastic wands are keeping traffic out of the lane. In this direction we only get a bus lane. I tend to avoid bus lanes. I don't usually include them massively in routes, but I feel that this is the best way to go, so I think it's good. And I just want to show you how this junction works, because it's quite complicated. If you're coming in the opposite direction, you just turn left, it's fine. Here, we're going right, but what we have to do first is we go to this holding area, and you can see that bike arrow, and then you wait for the green light, and then you go straight on. It's pretty ingenious, and when you watch it on a video, it's actually pretty obvious, but you might not think of it, and I do know of people who try and madly dash over the junction, and yeah, that's a pretty terrifying prospect, so I wouldn't do that. And you can see here that we've rejoined Cycle Superhighway 8, which was an original Cycle Superhighway route introduced by TfL, and during the pandemic it was fortunately upgraded with these really quite good ones actually. And although you did see, you saw one of the drawbacks of it, it sort of gave up at the junction there. It wasn't too good for a second, but we were fine to just hang back for a second. And it's also not protected as we go past the bus stand. It would be good to have the lane go to the left of the bus stand. I think that would make a lot of sense, especially since it's not a bus stop. Drivers will know to check when they get out of their vehicle, so it should be okay. But generally, these lanes in both directions are actually really quite good. I really like the segregation. I think it's probably one of the most extensive and most decent of the street space upgrades that were put in during the pandemic. And it really transformed this route from something that I wouldn't really recommend people go down. Wouldn't have previously met the conditions of this channel for a good route, but now it does. Now it's definitely really good. Not perfect, could certainly do with improvement, but look at these nice wide cycle lanes, really, really good. Nice and protected. Junctions aren't too much of an issue, and you can really make a lot of progress. It's also in an area of town where there isn't really much cycle infrastructure at all. Sort of around Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster kind of area. generally a bit of a desert for good cycling, and this is a really good exception, and it makes a really big difference, I think. So thanks for TfL for doing this. And you might note, you see the double red lines here. That means it's a red route, and that of course means it's controlled by TfL. It would be great to see TfL do more on their red routes. We're turning right here, and don't worry, you don't have to do what you did at the last one. You can see here we've got a filter, we turn right, you can see that the traffic is actually held there in the opposite direction, so it gives us the opportunity to turn across it without having to negotiate with the cars coming in the other direction. So it's actually a really simple one, and it puts us onto this great segregated lane on Vauxhall Bridge. Although I have to say that security barrier is placed a little bit too far over. It's not your imagination. The right hand lane on this two-way cycle track is just a little bit narrower than the left-hand lane, and that's because they put the security barrier in it instead of outside it. But yeah, I really like how they've done this Vauxhall Junction as well. It's really quite good. You just wait for the lights, and you go across. And normally I love showing this in a video when it works properly, but unfortunately this guy stopped in the middle of the cycle crossing, so it doesn't look as good. But trust me, it's decent. You go through this tunnel, and the first thing you do is, I think I turned off a little bit early here actually, you should probably go through there and turn off after the pillar. You go down Godding Street, and then we're going to head, oh, by the way, we've rejoined the South West Main Line. Do you remember the one we were cycling alongside before? That's now on the left hand side of us. Those railway arches, the trains go up there. So at your earliest opportunity, turn into Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, which you're allowed to cycle in, and make your way through it out onto Vauxhall Walk, which is the name of this street. This is a lovely bit of public space, by the way. I like the rain gardens here. It's quite nicely paved, and it's just quite nice to sit out at the pub, really, isn't it? For a little while now, we'll be following Cycleway 5, as this route is now known. It used to be called Quiet Way 5, but it's been renamed because TfL are renaming most of their quiet ways to cycleways. And I always wonder why motorists do this. They're kind of on the wrong side of the road there, aren't they? Nice to see that, by the way, a cargo bike. They're an increasingly common sight in London, actually, particularly when there's a lot of cycle infrastructure. In fact, I'm amazed at the speed with which they've proliferated across the city. You can see there, by the way, C5 on the road. It has been relabelled and re-signed now to C5. But yeah, cargo bikes, I think they're fantastic. Every time you go past a cargo bike, just remember, you could be going past a van. I'd definitely rather be overtaken by a cargo bike or close past by a cargo bike than I would a van. And yeah, they're just quite nice to see. Something tells me that won't be the only cargo bike we'll be seeing on this route. Don't ask me how I know that. It's almost like I've seen the footage. Be careful as you cross this road, by the way, because there could be cars coming in both directions. And just watch out as you go past the Pimlico Plumbers bit, as there could be vans and stuff pulling out. You can either use this semi-protected lane on the right, or just do what I'm doing here and pull out onto the protected crossing. And press the button if that light isn't green, and you'll be swiftly released into Hercules Road. And this is still C5. It's really quite a good route, isn't it? It's probably one of the better quiet ways now, certainly given its central location. And this little bollard here is doing a lot of work keeping all these streets nice and quiet. It's really quite a good one. That's Lambeth North Tube Station. You can see ahead of us, by the way, if that helps you get your bearings. When we get to the end of this street, you want to turn pretty much dead left onto this cycle track, and here we have a cycle gate. So there's two sets of traffic lights. We just went through a green, and then we waited at the red, and now we've got a green again, and we're going. The point in that, you might ask, what's the point in that? The point is to prevent conflicts between cycles and motor vehicles, so you'll always get a free run. The negative of it is that you are basically guaranteed at least one red light, because even if one of the lights is green, the other one will be red. On balance, it's probably a good way to do it if you're not going to have a dedicated cycle phase. Great cycle tracks on this street, by the way. Thank you, Lambeth Council, for building them. The street's called Bayliss Road, and it is named after Lillian Bayliss, who was the manager of the Old Vic Theatre, which is just there on the right. So that's a really nice thing. And you might notice that we're in another cycle gate here, so it's another sort of two traffic light jobby. Now we're heading on to the cut, and a motorist sort of speeds past me here. I don't really see why he felt he needed to do that. We are going straight on, and you can see here that's a no motor vehicles sign that we're going through, except for loading at certain times of day. And if you haven't been to the cut for a while, you might notice that it's actually really quite pretty. It's quite nice now, and there's no traffic on it because that no motor vehicles sign is keeping it nice and quiet for us. And we're at Southwark Tube Station here, and you want to turn left right onto CS6. Now, I debated which way to go here. I think it might have been slightly more direct to keep going straight there as you come out of the cut, and to go down Union Street, and to join Cycle Superhighway 7 and cross at Southwark Bridge. The reason I didn't recommend it is because I'm not sure about Cycle Superhighway 7. I don't think it's quite at the standard at that point, just south of Southwark Bridge. There's a large section with no segregation, and there's quite a lot of construction traffic around there. If you had to go that way, that would be fine, but there's a perfectly good route here, and I don't think it's too much slower. You know, it might add like 30 seconds or something like that, but it's still a very direct route, as you probably saw from the map at the beginning. So we're heading straight up Blackfriars Bridge, and that's where we're crossing the Thames again. If we were going on Southwark Bridge, we'd be slightly further east of here. It would be a slightly more easterly angle, but this is a good way to do it, I think. And it also ensures that you've got a really nice protected cycle track the whole way. These lights can be a bit of a pain, but fortunately we get a green wave all the way through both of them, which is really pleasant to see. See, we got green and another green, and then we turn off left here through another green, and we're going down. And in order to go east here, you need to first go west down this on-ramp, which is fine, if a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with it. And then turn left and be very careful, because at busy times this junction can get very busy with cyclists. And then wait at the light, and then just start heading straight down here. And this is called Cycle Superhighway 3 or Cycleway 3, and it's probably one of the best routes in London. It runs all the way down the Embankment, and the bit we're on here is going through the Blackfriars Underpass. By the way, this is probably a good time to say that if you're enjoying this video, if you'd like to see more of them, please do subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Makes a big difference to helping you and other people find them. Just a quick note about those red barriers just ahead there. So I believe there's going to be some construction work on this tunnel, Castle Baynard Street Tunnel, which is not a protected cycle lane. You might notice that van there. This is just a street with no through traffic on it, but it's still very pleasant. Apologies for the low quality here, it's not very well lit on my camera. This is what happens when the image stabilization is not working. So it's actually very, very good image stabilization most of the time, but it needs light in order to do it. And then we're nice and stabilized again. But that tunnel will be closed at some point. They've actually built a diversionary route through the tunnel next to it, which that's what those red barriers will be. So when you come through this route at some point during 2022, you won't be able to go through that tunnel. You'll have to go through the one next to it. This, by the way, is on the right there is actually Southwark Bridge. So if we'd gone Cycle Superhighway 7, this is where you would be joining the north side of the river again. As I say, I don't think it really adds too much time to go the way we went. It might be like 30 seconds, a minute, something like that. But I think it's just a safer, more pleasant cycle ride until Cycle Superhighway 7 is completely sorted out. They put a little bit more segregation on the, a little bit more protection on the lanes just south of Southwark Bridge. Talking of bridges, you may be interested to know that that one overhead is the continuation of London Bridge, King William Street, I believe it's called. And there's also another lovely bridge here. This little pedestrian walkway is called a pedway, and there used to be loads of these around the City of London. Most of them are around the Barbican now. There's one or two, including that one around here. And when the city was rebuilding in the post-war period, they thought it would be a good idea to stick these pedestrian walkways between buildings at sort of sky level, and I think they're really cool. Although thinking about it, the sort of design philosophy behind it was that the street would be for cars and pedestrians could go above. I mean, as cool as they are, as modernist and fun as they are, I actually think the street should be for people as well. So we should have people in the sky and people on the street. That would be fantastic if we could have both of those. As you are probably aware, that on the right there is the Tower of London, and then to the right there you can also see Tower Bridge. It's two extremely overrated tourist attractions in my view. And even more interestingly, we can see another cargo bike on our right there. I told you there are quite a few. You basically see one pretty much every time you go out these days. in London, I think that is only going to increase because they are they're just a really practical solution to a lot of stuff. I think for small businesses, for last mile deliveries, stuff like that. And yeah, they're just very cost effective too. You know, you can drop they're about £2,000 or something like that for a cargo bike, and you know, that's cheaper than a van, cheaper to run than a van. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that if you go on job websites like Indeed or something like that, there are loads of vacancies for cargo bike couriers. So, you know, maybe that could be you if you're looking for a job, if you have experience riding a cargo bike. Or even if you don't, you could get experience by going to Hackney, which has actually introduced a cargo bike rental scheme. And you can rent one, try it out, ride it around, and then you can say you've got experience with one and apply for those jobs. And if you watch enough of these videos, then you will know the best way to get from A to B. So make sure you hit subscribe. So we are now on quite a narrow cycle track, but I quite like it because, you know, it's a relatively ordinary street and it just shows what you can do. You can fit a cycle track down a street like this. It's not a particularly wide road, and yeah, it's great. If I'd much rather it should be a bit wider, but you know, if we had these everywhere, I'm pretty sure that everyone would cycle everywhere. We are, of course, on Cabul Street now, site of the Battle of Cabul Street in 1936, where Oswald Mosley's fascists were beaten off, and on the right there is a very nice mural commemorating the battle. And if you ever cycle down here, I highly recommend stopping to have a look at it, because it is a really nice mural, and it depicts the battle in a very artistic way. And we just went past Shadwell Overground Station there, by the way, just in case you needed to get your bearings. This little bit coming up here is actually really quite nice. It's recently been redone with some rain gardens, so you can see these nice little bits of planting. And there was a Tower Hamlets COVID testing centre there, I think, as well, that we just went past, run by the local council. So if you need to cycle to get a COVID test, and that's a good idea, because, you know, if you don't have a car in London, most people don't, and you don't want to take public transport when you need a PCR test, that's great. You can cycle to it easily. So good shout, good call by Tower Hamlets Council for siting the centre along the cycleway, because that's actually quite smart. Good joined up thinking there by the council. I can only encourage them to build more cycle infrastructure and to push ahead with their Livable Streets programme, which they've paused. In particular, they promised to put a bus gate on Grove Road through Victoria Park, and then not done it. And that's really a really important part of a new cycleway. So if you live in Tower Hamlets, please do write to your councillors and ask them to filter Grove Road, because that area is in serious need of a safe cycle route. Now, when I got to this crossing, I pressed this button and it didn't work, and you can see the light didn't actually go green there. And I was waiting there for a good 5 minutes, because I always wait for the lights in these videos completely. And it did not change. It didn't change until somebody else pressed the button. So that crossing was actually malfunctioning when I was there. It may have been fixed by the time you get there, I don't know. But if it doesn't appear to be working when you press it, press a different button, or frankly just find a gap in the traffic. Now we're coming out here, and here is Limehouse DLR. So we've made it all the way from Clapham Junction to Limehouse, probably in about the same amount of time as it would take you to get the train, but significantly cheaper, and without having to change trains. So make sure you hit subscribe on the channel, and thank you very much for watching that. And if you've got any requests for future routes or any comments about the video, I always love to hear them. So yeah, let me know underneath, and see you again next time.